Have you ever gone to the doctor and felt like you weren't being heard?
I think all the time. All of our healthcare experiences lead us sometimes to minimize our own pain because we are afraid that we won't be heard or we think we're not going to be heard.
That brings us right to our guest here today, Caitlin Keating, the producer of Take Care of Maya. I highly recommend it.
So she kind of just checked all the boxes of someone who looked quote unquote crazy. They just didn't believe her.
You're a mom. You're going to do anything you can for your child.
I just felt like that story needed to be told.
There's data to show that we are not making up being treated less than in healthcare.
Gender bias in healthcare is not a myth. Welcome to Broadlines. I'm Natalie Lizaraga.
And I'm Rae Williams.
And today we are going to be talking about gender bias in women's healthcare. We're also going to be joined a little later by a guest. We're talking to documentary producer Caitlin Keating, best known for Take Care of Maya, which we both watched. We both had to take time to process everything that was happening. It is definitely relevant to our conversation here today.
And we're going to get into some facts and statistics about women in the healthcare system, the things that affect us, and talk about some solutions about how we can actually overcome some of the difficulties women have when it comes to gender bias.
I want to start really by just asking you a question. Have you ever gone to the doctor and felt like you weren't being heard or that anything you were saying was maybe being minimized or just kind of brushed off?
I think all the time. And I had an incident recently. I wouldn't say it wasn't so much that I wasn't being heard, but I went to urgent care. First of all, I was at home and I was in pain. I reached over, something snapped. I heard it snap. And I had this deep pain. I couldn't breathe in. And my boyfriend was like, you need to go to urgent care. And I'm like, no. Because I think as women, we're like, no. We know pain, all of that. He forced me to go to urgent care. He actually came into the office with me. And when she asked for my pain scale, I said, well, right now it's a 4. And he looked at her and he looked at me and he's like, she couldn't breathe earlier. She was doubled over. It was really concerning. Her pain was at a 9. And it's so interesting because it's not something that I would have maybe said for myself, because I think all of our healthcare experiences lead us sometimes to minimize our own pain because we are afraid that we won't be heard or we think we're not going to be heard. So I was just kind of looking at him like, wait, he's right. And why didn't I say that? You know what I mean? But as a man, of course, his first instinct is go to urgent care because something's wrong. And 2, play up exactly how much pain I'm in because I'm in that much pain. There is this kind of bias that even is internalized, I think, for us as women.
Yeah. There's also the jokes that go around social media, you don't know when we have a cold, but you definitely know when your husband or your boyfriend or partner has a cold. They're much bigger babies about that. We just sometimes have higher pain tolerance. So sometimes that could get dismissed. I mean, we've seen in culture this happen to celebrities. You did a lot of research with which celebrities have gone to doctors and needed different kinds of specialists or referrals after someone didn't listen to the amount of pain they were actually in.
They're documented cases, and I'm glad these celebrities have talked about them. But Bindi Irwin spoke about her delayed diagnosis for endometriosis. Padma Lakshmi also had a diagnosis for endometriosis that made her actually start a foundation. That's how passionately she felt about it. Halsey spoke about, multiple chronic illnesses and being, misdiagnosed. Serena Williams, famously, of course, documented just fighting for scans. She had a blood clot after she gave birth and she knew something was wrong and she had to several times advocate for herself. Halle Berry has shared about perimenopause and menopause and just even the struggle to get information and different diagnoses for those. And it made me think, if these women are, celebrities, everybody knows them, they're supposedly powerful, what does that mean for the rest of us? Because it feels like a lot of them, especially even after they spoke out, faced backlash for even speaking out about, this gender bias.
You think that in those situations, I think what you're pointing to is so alarming is that we assume they have all the resources in the world. So they must have the best doctors, they must have the best specialists. But even in those situations, privileged or not, women aren't being heard when their symptoms are very, very real. And I think one of the things that we should definitely talk about is gender bias in the healthcare system and what that refers to, because we've both done our fair share of research on this topic and really kind of dove in. And it's systematic errors in clinical judgment, diagnosis, treatment, and research. So that systematically is a disadvantage to one gender, which happens to be ours.
Of course.
In a lot of cases, that gender is women. Like I said, the bias is often unintentional, but it still has a lot of consequences. That's according to the National Institute of Health. And misdiagnosis or diagnosis that take years, months, those could be the consequences. Clinical surveys show that women are more likely than men to believe these gender discriminations that affect the care that they receive. In one survey, more than half of women, compared to about a third of men, believe that discrimination is a serious problem in healthcare. We're getting those numbers and that survey from a survey that happened in 2019 by Today and SurveyMonkey.
I think part of it is that it's clinical. Women were excluded from trials until 1993. So they were excluded from U.S. clinical trials, usually to prevent fetal harm or perceived hormone variability. But that means that a lot of the research that we see doesn't include women and is based on men, which makes it particularly dangerous because, of course, we have different bodies, we have different systems, all of that. In 1993, there was the National Institute of Health Revitalization Act, which mandated that women and minorities be included in clinical research with special focus on analyzing sex-specific differences. And so if you think about 1993, like my brother was born in 94, so that's what's that, 33 years ago? So we've only been included in these clinical trials for 30 years about, which is crazy to me.
Yeah, we actually did a roundtable with doctors a few weeks ago, and it was alarming to see the lack of research that there is on women, which means it's tougher to diagnose. If all of your research and numbers and stats are about males, it's really hard to then understand the female body and the female condition, really, of what we're going through when it comes to periods, menopause, and heart disease, another big one. So the lack of research is a really big one. That exclusion means that all of the treatments and the diagnosis that are going to be based on males, which now that's changed, but as you said, not very recently. There's still so much lack of research and information.
And it has trickled down. So what's happening now is that women are waiting longer to be diagnosed for things. So I was looking at some stats, and women wait longer than men in emergency rooms, particularly when presenting with pain, which, again, back to my incident, I thought that was really interesting because would I have waited longer if he wasn't with me? Like, I don't know. But researchers and clinicians at NYU Grossman School of Medicine presented findings that women with heart attack symptoms wait longer for care in emergency departments. And they said that they were less likely to be triaged as an emergency, waited 10 minutes longer to be evaluated, and were less likely to get an EKG with heart attack symptoms, less likely to get an EKG. So that's just one of the examples of how, this kind of bias has trickled down and makes it particularly dangerous, right? And then endometriosis, for example, takes an average of 4 to 12 years to diagnose. And I know on the internet, we've probably seen countless. I think we all know someone who has endometriosis, and probably that person has a story about how long it took for them to get an answer.
I do notice that, like that and PCOS, it takes everyone a long time to figure out what exactly is going on. And when you think about getting a diagnosis, 4 to 12 years, that's the average.
4 years is already crazy. 4 to 12 is crazy, but even 4 years.
And endometriosis is very famously very painful.
Yeah.
So suffering for that long without a diagnosis. And I want to be specific here that it's not just, female reproductive treatments and things like that. We're talking about, as you said, heart attacks, other things that are universal to men and women, not just female health.
And then there was a landmark study in the Journal of Law, Medicine, and Ethics that found that women's pain is more likely to be described as emotional or psychological rather than physical.
We debunked that last week.
If you listen to our episode, Are Women Too Emotional? We talk about all of that and how it's not true. But that is one of the things that they found in these studies, that they're more likely to look at us as women and be like, hey, you have a headache? It might be anxiety. And there was a report by Solient Health in 2024 that said that misdiagnoses of women aren't rare. The analysis shows that many women's symptoms, especially for complex conditions, are dismissed as stress, hormonal issues, or my favorite, all in your head, rather than investigated thoroughly. And that goes back to what we were talking about with, Are Women Too Emotional? These perceived emotions carry over into our healthcare, which is very annoying and very dangerous.
There's something to be said about how frustrating it must be to continually tell a doctor, another doctor about your same symptoms. And maybe you start to change them. Maybe it's something else. Maybe you start to believe, but deep down, you know something is not right and you keep repeating the same symptoms and not being heard. I have personally not had that happen to me, but I can only imagine how frustrating it is to go through an already convoluted and complicated healthcare system to try to get what you need, not to mention expensive.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the doctors from our roundtable had gone over, and this really struck me, that we were always taught to know the symptoms of a heart attack in our dads or in males, and never the symptoms of a heart attack in women. And they're a little bit different. They're described differently. So when you describe it to a doctor, you know, a man might say they're having excruciating chest pains. She might say I have tightness in my chest, like things that are different. And it's amazing to me because there's a bias right there that it was never even considered to tell. You know, I remember like looking at my parents are older, just being like, I know what it would look like if something was going on, but not in my mom. And it just wasn't taught to us. So such simple micro things like that actually are a big deal because I would never know.
Yeah. I always read my health reports because I'm always interested to see what the doctors write after. And after my last physical last year, the doctor wrote in my chart that my speech was rapid and pressured. Now, you and I know I just talk really fast.
like
I just talk really fast, and I have
talker.
ADHD, so I might like lose track halfway through the sentence and switch to something else. But I'll come back. And I just found that really interesting because I thought about the fact that if a future doctor sees this, especially a doctor that might be inclined to not take symptoms seriously, and they see that my speech is rapid and pressured, would they associate this with some kind of, you know, like emotion or psychological condition and then not believe whatever it is that I am complaining about? And I just hated that that's going to be in the chart, on my chart for the rest of my life, for people to, for other doctors to see. And it's there, you know, and all you have to do is see it once. And if there's already this automatic gender bias, you might then say, well, this person, you know, clearly has like a stroke of crazy.
Well, I think interestingly enough, what you're saying, I don't think I've ever read my notes back. You know, they print them out. I'm like, whatever, where's the thing that says the prescription that I'm supposed to go get? So that's what I'm looking for. But I would actually challenge people to go and see if they could find those, to see what the doctor is writing. And I'm not saying just if you have a male doctor, but it is interesting because you're telling them your symptoms. What they're interpreting might be something totally and completely different, but it is all written down.
And something that affects your future medical care if other doctors are going to look at it and have an opinion either way. So let's get into what this means for us, what this means for the FQ community, women, people with daughters, all of that.
Yeah. I mean, we just went over a lot of the numbers that only tell part of the story. You just went over one very good example, lived experience dealing with these kind of bias. And there are a lot of clinical surveys that show women are more likely than men to believe gender discrimination affects the healthcare that they receive. And in one of those surveys, more than half the women, compared to about 1/3 of the men, believe discrimination is a serious problem in healthcare. So we're talking about something very relevant that probably has affected a lot of you guys out there.
Yeah. And then, of course, we have to talk about a little bit the intersectionality of it, because anything that affects all women typically disproportionately affects women of color more than the general population. In this case, we see that a lot with maternal health care. And so Black women in the U.S. are 3 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related causes than white women. That's according to the CDC. And we know that a lot of that has to do with their symptoms and their pain and, you know, the things that they're describing to doctors not being taken seriously. And then on top of that, just in general, health disparities like that lead to lost productivity, missed work, economic impact. I mean, we're going to talk a little bit later to our producer who's going to tell us about this documentary that we were watching. But one of the things that we do see is that their whole lives are consumed, you know, by these healthcare issues. So that's something to also note.
That brings us right to our guest here today. Thank you so much. We're joined right now by Caitlin Keating, the producer of Take Care of Maya. It's on Netflix. I highly recommend it. I also recommend being in the right headspace before you go on this emotional roller coaster.
Yes. Well, yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
We have a lot to cover because we both sat down, watched, processed, and came up with a lot of questions for you.
And went on a deep dive. I don't know if you did that, but afterwards, I was on Google, and mad as hell. Were you mad?
Especially as a mom, I was extremely frustrated. And there were a lot of times I had to take a pause.
Yeah. I mean, it was actually really interesting that it premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival. So I actually got to hear the responses, which is so rare when you have a film come out on Netflix or really anywhere. And the anger, I mean, the shock. And for years, I was like, how are people going to respond to that one scene or that one bite? But it was just, everyone was just gasping, crying. I mean, it was wild to actually see that for the first time.
I was going to ask you that because as a viewer, I'm frustrated, but I can't imagine in the process making it how you had to, still be professional and temper those frustrations about what was happening.
Oh, that's the entire job. It's how do you not show your bias? How do you see both sides? How do you go into this story not knowing what really happened and not, I wasn't the judge. It was not up to me to decide what really happened. It was to show the human story, to try to get into Beata's head, to speak the truth of the Kowalski family, and also really dig into, Johns Hopkins and all the court records. I mean, my background's being a journalist, so I feel like that's what I call myself, a former documentary filmmaker. So it's just learning as much as I possibly could, and that took years to try to get it right.
And how did you come across this particular case? And I know you do a lot of stuff with women in general. Was that part of it?
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned earlier maternal mortality. I worked at People magazine for a very long time before this, and I covered a lot of human interest stories. And I just kept uncovering these stories about women who were dying during childbirth, who said they had, really alarming symptoms. And the doctor was just like, oh, you're fine. You're overreacting. And they didn't survive. I personally, in middle school, was diagnosed with celiac disease, an autoimmune condition. It took about 3.5 years to get that diagnosis. Caitlin, you're bulimic. Oh, you fainted. Yeah, you're not eating enough. It's in your head. It's anxiety. So I think I suppressed that. Once I finally had this diagnosis, felt totally fine. Took years.
Right.
And then started covering these stories. And it just was something I really cared about. I think showing people's truth, showing that they're not crazy, they're not making it up. And I really wanted to get into documentary filmmaking. And I came across the story of the Kowalski family in a local newspaper. And that's how I first found it. Yeah.
When you said the anxiety thing, it made me think of that scene where she tells her mom it's not anxiety. And the doctors are telling her, no, it's just anxiety. Did you feel that very personally?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Even now I have chills thinking about it because it's like I know that feeling. But even if I didn't know that feeling, we all, like you were just saying, like you at urgent care, I mean, we all know someone who's experienced that, maybe not at this level, obviously. But it felt personal, but it also just felt like something that other people would or could relate to. And that's one of the many reasons I decided I had to pursue this as a film.
I do think we should do it justice by telling everyone what the story is here and the story about Maya. And you talked about how you came across it. How old was Maya at the time?
She was 10 years old.
She is experiencing excruciating pain. This kind of happened overnight.
Basically. CRPS, I mean, without getting into all the details, basically, it's typically triggered by an incident, like an accident, so a gymnastics accident or falling off a horse. And basically, without being a doctor here, it's your injury doesn't really heal, and all of the nerves in your body kind of get rewired. And the pain didn't go away. So Maya was in a minor little accident, just having fun as a 10-year-old kid. And she was diagnosed with CRPS by a few doctors. And then everything took a horrible turn when she went to Johns Hopkins in St. Petersburg one night, and they didn't believe the diagnosis.
And then to go a little further into the story, you have to watch a documentary because there's so many nuances. But what happens is Beata, her mother, ends up taking her own life, thinking that this is the only way to free Maya from essentially what is healthcare prison, because she's under medical supervision 24/7 in state care. You do such an expert job of just kind of going into all of the nuances of, everything that the family was going through and they felt. And you're also aided by these very detailed notes that Beata left. When you came across those particular set of notes, especially as a woman and someone kind of tracking this, like how did you feel?
I mean, I was crying. I was devastated. I think when it comes to suicide, we'll never understand why someone would take their own life. But I could read Beata's notes and hear from her why she did. And she really did think, I mean, I'm of course not putting words in her mouth, but what she wrote was that it was the only way to free her daughter. And I think if you're put in a position where you think your daughter is going to die, I think most parents, would choose their child over their own life. And I think that's what it came down to. And shortly after she took her own life, Maya was released from the hospital, which is what she thought would happen. because they never accused the father.
Right. I was just about to get into the differences there. As we saw, and as we're talking about here, these gender biases, her dad was able to go visit her in the hospital. She was accused. We talked about the numbers, mothers more likely accused. And even watching, I think one of the most compelling things to me, if we're talking about gender bias, is the way, and I don't know how you got these, but good for you, the text messages between doctors calling her all sorts of names. And also Maya, obviously a young girl, being told that she's a liar, don't believe what she says. And we talk about Beata as the mom and a woman in this situation, a mother, but the little girl not also believed.
Mhm.
But everything the dad was saying, true, and everything, he could be trusted. Can you talk about seeing those differences as you were going through this process?
Yeah, I mean, I got to know Jack very well, and he is this very even-keeled guy. Could never
Mhm.
imagine him raising his voice. He's, I think, a former fire chief from Chicago, just salt of the earth, lovely man. And he's someone, when you walk into a hospital, typically would not be accused of abuse. He's not, doesn't fit the profile, is what we found through all this research. Beata, was from Poland, had a very thick accent, pretty harsh accent when you're really angry, coming in, guns blazing. Your daughter's in a lot of pain. She was a nurse. She was demanding ketamine, which was the treatment. So she kind of just checked all the boxes of someone who looked, quote unquote, crazy. They just didn't believe her. And, we could talk about this for days, right? But I think Jack just didn't fit that profile. And she did. And after, once they have that in their mind, there's no going back.
You're a mom. You're going to do anything you can for your child. And I felt like it was also hard for me to watch her be restrained. Like told to, if you calm down, we'll get more out of it. But instinctually, that's not, you're enraged.
We discussed this in the SQ newsletter, and there was a statistic that said despite 20% of women feeling like they're not being believed by their doctors, women are still the ones primarily facilitating healthcare for their families and just carrying this invisible load. And, as a journalist, you went through all of this evidence. Of course, you had to look at what the other healthcare teams were saying, what Johns Hopkins was saying. What made you eventually or initially believe Beata and Maya?
Well, first, my job is not, I think, to believe one side over the other, because I think at the end of the day, no one truly knows exactly what happened. But what is true and what's undeniable is the trauma and the pain that Maya lived through and what she's still living through. So that right away, that's real. A mother should never take her own life. That's real. And I just felt like that story needed to be told. And when I realized how big of a problem this is so systemic. There are so many parents who are accused of child abuse, not just Munchausen, who say that they didn't do it, that their kid had a rare disease, or, Frank fell off the bed. I didn't do anything wrong. It's the fight to prove that you didn't do something that I just knew I needed to explore. And then once I met Jack and Maya and Kyle, I just fell in love with them. They're just incredible people, and they needed their story to be told. So it was from the beginning, and also just the amount of archive that we had, all the audio, the video, the depositions. It just felt like the perfect film. I mean, I wish it never happened, because I wish in a way I didn't have a job, because then none of these stories wouldn't.
Yeah, but then it's also important that it did.
Yeah, and then since then, I mean, it came out, 2.5 years ago. Every week I'm getting messages from parents, and mostly mothers.
I was just going to ask you what the response has been. And you said, it's 2.5 years. I'm sure initially you saw people in their seats react. I'm actually curious about the other side of things, how we know how moms and other people being accused, or other families, because I didn't know this was, I assumed, isolated incident. And I love how you were thorough about showing the other families that this is not just a one-off. This happens. What has the response been, though, from the medical community on the other side?
Yeah, well, I mean, let's be real. I think, mandated reporting is so important. Like, if you suspect that there's child abuse, you should be calling DCFS. And it's so tricky, because I think that there, in a lot of cases, is this rush to judgment where you call DCFS, maybe not thinking like, well, if this person isn't actually guilty, like, I've just destroyed their life, because there's nothing worse than hurting a child. I think a lot of mandated reporters have really they've agreed with this film. They're really happy it was told. There are others that, think that maybe people might shy away from making a report because of, what could happen. So it's overwhelmingly, it's been very positive, and people are really happy that we're doing this. Social workers, nurses, doctors. I mean, we have people from lots of hospitals who are reaching out being like totally anonymous, but like this is happening where we work at other big, famous multi-billion-dollar hospitals and corporations. And they're like, we don't really know what to do about it. So, they're forced to call in a report sometimes from their boss. So it's just, the response has been great, but of course, there are some people who think that maybe we've caused some damage.
I just think it's so important that you told that story.
Yeah.
Whether it's on an extreme end or that there was so many parents that even if it was minor, because what is happening to Maya was now a long process, especially in the court system, but that just took the case plan and we're like, this is the easiest way to get rid of this, even though I didn't do anything. But again, you're putting your child first. And I think it's just such an important story to tell on even the smaller levels of gender bias when you're at your own doctor. Like, fight for yourself to be believed. What is happening to you is very real.
Oh, completely. And that's when I think back to myself in middle school, too. It's like I had to fight for myself. My parents did. I mean, thank God they weren't accused of Munchausen or something. I had upper endoscopies. I had these, a kid going under anesthesia. Like, it so quickly could have turned into something else. But I think, the families that are still reaching out, they're saying that sometimes Take Care of Maya is referenced in their own court case. Like, judges are now saying, oh, it was on Netflix. Like, this must be real. Like, maybe I should take a second. So to me, it's so worth it because it wasn't just giving the Kowalskis a voice. Right. It was giving a lot of other people a voice just by validating that this is happening to other people, so it could be happening to them.
From the families and the people that you've heard from, because we kind of obviously saw this with Maya, do you think that a lot of the women and girls and even some of the mothers are now afraid of the healthcare system from what you've heard from them, or afraid to go to the doctor with all of this going on?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, that's another big thing. I mean, just from like Instagram messages, like people asking me my advice on what they should do.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, oh my God, I'm not a doctor, I'm not an attorney, but like, don't, listen, you don't have to listen to me. This is what I think you should do. I think there's, a lot of fear from parents too, especially with children that are young. I mean, Maya obviously could speak up for herself and look what happened, but a lot of kids that don't have a voice yet and parents are like, I just, I don't have money. Like, I'm an immigrant. Like, is my kid going to be taken from me? Do you know an attorney in Tennessee? Like, can you help? Should I bring an attorney with me to the hospital? I mean, those are questions I'm getting. And the fact that you think you need an attorney to go to the emergency room with you is just like insane.
It's crazy.
You did a Google deep dive on the current status of what is going on with Maya and her family. We did see that they did end up filing a lawsuit against the hospital. That kind of we saw it in the documentary, but we never really got to the end of what actually happened.
Eventually this film had to come out and the trial kept on getting pushed for many reasons. But I think the court of public opinion, overall was that this family, they needed this justice. They needed to go to court. They needed to be heard. They needed to quote unquote win, I guess. And they did. So a couple months after the film came out, they did go to trial. It was a 9-week trial. I flew down to Sarasota just to be there because I was so invested. And they did win on every single count. The money that they won, which is out there, hundreds of millions of dollars, it was just the most bittersweet thing in the entire world for them because it's like all they wanted was Beata back. The hospital said from day one that if the family won, they would have appealed it, and they did. They won that appeal. Most things were overturned, and now it's still being litigated. But I have to say, though, speaking to Maya, Jack, and Kyle, it's like the public believes them, and that's what really matters.
That's important, yeah.
The money is like, you don't need. You're not
they were
going to
not
be
in
happy.
that for the money. It was
driving around in a sports car now. It's like, no, they want Beata back. They wish this never happened to them, and it's just they just want peace. They just want this to be over, and these legal battles go on for so many years. But the fact that the courtroom was packed when I was there, when Maya took the stand, I mean, the news outlets that were covering it at that point, I couldn't help but just look around and be like, I'm so glad that we did this.
You wanted her to have that moment.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it was breathtaking and a spectacular thing to watch her finally, after all this time, be able to speak for herself.
Yeah, exactly.
And not only have the public believe her, but know that things are now changed because there's this awareness out there, that came from this tragic situation so that others don't get into the same situation. And, women, children, mothers, all of that are able to say, okay, no, I need to speak for, myself. I can see this. This is a resource, that kind of thing.
It was certainly an important story to tell, and we appreciate you being here with us today. Obviously, a filmmaker, so that was 2.5 years ago, as you mentioned. I'm sure you've been busy. There's a Where in the World is Caitlin going on.
Exactly.
What are you working on now?
I'm working on an ABC News 2-part series that's going to be on Hulu. It's probably coming out in a few months. Also involves a family court system. It's basically focusing on parental alienation, which is a topic that people started reaching out to me about after Take Care of Maya. It's a very different story, but they were... people were reaching out about that topic, so I'm doing something for them. And another project for Hulu probably coming out at the end of the year. I can't talk about it yet, but it's about a very old crime and kind of about the trauma and what stays with you decades later.
Count me in.
Yeah. So
if there's any sort of true crime, I'm
there you go.
for
but
it.
also, again, something that's much bigger than just one person's story. Like those are the stories that I have to cover. It can't just be like, oh yeah, that poor family. It's like, oh wow, this is actually something that's quite universal, but told through, the story of one person or a family.
What's one message that you hope that viewers take away from this film?
That I think so few things in life are black and white. It's a lot of gray. And to have compassion and just to not rush to judgment. I think to really listen to people and to hear them. Because I think if we do more of that, we'd be in a much better place.
What is it like these days, especially being a woman in the filmmaking field and specifically documentaries?
When I got into it, maybe about 5 years ago, kind of transitioning from journalism, it was a lot of men. And it was a lot of like, you don't really know what you're doing, Caitlin, kind of attitude. And I didn't know what I was doing. But it was interesting how if a guy didn't know what he was doing, I felt
they were ambitious.
I didn't. Yeah, exactly. I didn't really get that vibe. So it was more, I've always been someone who has to prove myself. But I felt like in the beginning, it was really having to prove myself to fellow directors and at production companies. And I'm in a much better place now, I think. But I think more and more women are, taking on these senior roles as producers and directors. So it's still, though, having to be, to act like you're the boss and not be afraid to run the set the way that you want it to be run. I'm co-directing this project right now and with a man, but he's my best friend and business partner. But even now, it's like, no, we're equal. And reminding not him, but people in this, in that environment that I'm also in charge too.
Right. I feel like the inclination sometimes is naturally to go to the man or like, if a woman and a man walk into a room, like you tend to think the man is in charge for some reason. So,
And you have to set that tone because if you don't in the beginning, then it's over. That's just the way it's going to be moving forward. So having that courage, which can feel very intimidating.
What a great conversation we've had about gender bias, about Take Care of Maya, all these things kind of intertwined together. I think we have to go over our takeaways here, the solutions that we learned. And I think one of the major ones we talked about early in this episode was making the research more inclusive. We need women involved so that we know what is happening with their bodies, with their conditions. Because, Caitlin, as you said, growing up, so many misdiagnoses or having to go through things that maybe if there was more research, more females in that space, we'd have the answers quicker.
100%.
We're not imagining the delay. It's actually measurable. There's data to show that we are not making up being treated less than in healthcare, and that we also have to speak up and advocate for ourselves and others if we want these things to change.
And also, I think the other thing is your preparation when you go to the doctor. Being able to advocate for yourself, to make sure, like you said, you're looking at the notes. To be thorough in what's happening, because we a lot of times, and especially as women, I'll just speak for myself here, like default to they're the authority. They know what's happening. I second guess myself because maybe I'm not sure and they know more than me. But you know yourself and you know your body and what's going on.
I actually have a friend who is a doctor. She's also a woman of color. And so she is in healthcare, but she also has to deal with healthcare bias, which I think is always interesting. And I asked her what she would advise her patients to do when it comes to dealing with gender bias in healthcare. And so she said, actually, what we just talked about, preparation is a big one. So she said, advocacy begins before you walk into the exam room. So come equipped with your symptom timeline, medication lists. I think a lot of the things that Beata actually had that enabled you to tell her story so accurately and so thoroughly is like, just having those things documented. So she recommends that. She also recommends trusting your body and knowing that persistent symptoms deserve evaluation. She said medicine a lot of the time is a process of elimination. So don't be deterred by like tedious testing or, saying we need more research. She also said seeking a second opinion is a powerful tool, which again, we've talked about that. She said she's had many women say that they feel more heard or understood by female physicians, but not because male physicians lack the skill, but because emotional safety is really important. So if it's even for that reason to seek a second opinion of someone you are going to be able to articulate your symptoms better with, as we talked about in the beginning, like not just saying my chest is tight, being like, no, my pain is at 9.5 out of 10. And then her last one was to acknowledge that medicine isn't perfect. So as women, both physicians and patients, we have a role to continue to push those boundaries. That includes advocating for ourselves and advocating for more funding and advocating for more inclusion. So she said, just remember that, medicine is a work in progress and that we have to push it forward as much as the doctors do.
I think one of the takeaways here that we should really acknowledge is that gender bias in healthcare is not a myth. What you're going through is valid. It is real. And if you're listening, thinking to yourself, well, I've, downplayed my symptoms or maybe I'm not right. You are. And there are a lot of people and a lot of women, especially, that are going through this.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I think what you're doing, just even the things I'm hearing about you working on in the future, as well as this documentary, are so important, especially for, families, for women, for mothers, all of that. So thank you for the work that you do. I can't thank you enough. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you. This was such a great conversation.
Thank you. I know you are a busy woman.
No, I have to make time for this. This is so important.
And that was this week's Broadlines, you guys. We will have more next week, another interesting topic, maybe another interesting guest. So you'll have to stay tuned to see what we talk about next.